Have you ever heard a story so powerful that it makes you stop and ask yourself, what would I have done in her place? This is the story of Clara Johnson, a woman who had every reason to turn away, but instead she opened her heart to 3 abandoned children. And 25 years later, that choice would come back in the most unexpected way when one of them stepped forward to stop an execution. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what you would have done if life put you in Clara's shoes. Clara Johnson lived in a small, worn-down house on the corner of Willow Street. Life had not been easy on her. A widow in her mid-30s, working long hours as a cleaner in the city, Clara carried her burdens quietly. She had no riches, no great status in the world. But she had something far stronger, a heart that refused to harden, no matter how much pain it had endured. It was on a cold November evening that her life changed forever. Outside the old church, on the steps beneath the flickering streetlight, she found them, 3 children, huddled together, shivering in the night. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. No parent in sight, no one to claim them. The eldest, Malik, maybe 6 or 7 years old, held his younger brother Darius close, while little Aisha, no older than 3, clung to his arm. They were silent, not even asking for help, as if life had already taught them not to expect kindness. Clara stood frozen. She could have walked away, called the authorities, told herself it wasn't her problem. But something inside her, something deeper than reason, pulled her forward. She knelt down, looked into their frightened eyes, and said softly, "Come on now, you're not alone anymore." That single choice rewrote the story of her life. Taking in 3 children when you barely have enough to feed yourself is not a decision anyone makes lightly. The neighbors whispered, "She can't raise them. She'll ruin her own life." But Clara didn't listen. She worked double shifts. She sewed clothes until her fingers ached. Some nights she skipped meals, so the children would never go hungry. But the hardest battles were not the financial ones. Malik, Darius, and Aisha carried invisible wounds. Malik had anger that flared at the smallest things, his young shoulders already bearing a weight too heavy for him. Darius often stayed silent, escaping into books and drawings. And little Aisha cried herself to sleep, afraid that one day Clara would leave too. Clara knew she couldn't erase their pain, but she could give them something solid, a sense of home. Every night, no matter how tired she was, she gathered them around the little wooden table in the kitchen. With hands held tight, she prayed over them, whispering blessings for a future she wasn't even sure they would reach. Those prayers became their anchor. Those prayers became their anchor. As the years passed, the children grew. But the outside world was not kind. Malik, the eldest, struggled the most. He was sharp, intelligent, but restless. Teachers often labeled him trouble before he even opened his mouth. In stores, security guards followed him. On the streets, he learned the hard way that being young, black, and poor meant carrying an invisible target. Darius, quieter, buried himself in books. His teachers dismissed him as strange. But Clara saw brilliance in his thoughtful eyes, and little Aisha grew strong beyond her years, helping Clara with chores, watching her brothers carefully, as though afraid they might disappear. Clara carried them all on her shoulders, reminding them again and again, "You are not what the world calls you. You are mine, and you are loved." But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. When Malik reached his teenage years, the pressure became too much. The anger he had carried since childhood boiled over. One night, he fell in with a group of older boys. Boys who seemed fearless. Boys who offered him a place to belong. What began as reckless fun spiraled into disaster. A night of bad choices ended with sirens, flashing lights, and Malik in handcuffs. Though no one was harmed, the charges against him were heavy, far heavier than they should have been for a boy his age. Clara sat in the courtroom, hands trembling, as the system painted her son as a menace. She wanted to stand, to shout that he was more than the file on their desk, that he was the boy who once cried himself to sleep, the boy who promised to protect his little sister from every shadow. But the world didn't want to hear that story. Malik was sentenced, and Clara's heart broke that day in ways words could not explain. The years turned into decades. Clara grew older. Her once dark hair turned silver, her hands frail from years of labor. Yet, she never abandoned Malik. Every week, she wrote letters, pouring hope onto paper, reminding him of the prayers they once said around the kitchen table. She visited whenever she could, her tired body making long journeys to a place where hope seemed almost impossible to find. Darius and Aisha, shaped by Clara's sacrifices, built lives of their own. Aisha became a nurse, pouring compassion into her patients the way Clara once poured it into her. Darius became a teacher, determined to give children the fairness and encouragement he and his siblings never received. But Malik remained behind bars, a boy who had grown into a man inside prison walls. And then came the day Clara had feared for years. The day the letter arrived. Cold, merciless. Malik's sentence had reached its end. The execution date was set. The news of Malik's execution date spread through the family like a storm. For Clara, it was a crushing weight she could barely carry. Every wrinkle on her face, every tremble in her hands, told the story of years spent praying this very moment would never come. Aisha fought with fury. She called lawyers, wrote letters, begged reporters to hear her brother's story. But every door she knocked on closed. The world had already made up its mind about Malik long ago. Darius was different, quiet, patient, a teacher by day, but a student of justice by night. For years, he had studied law in secret, determined to understand the very system that tore his family apart. And now, when Malik's life hung in the balance, that knowledge became his weapon. He pored over every page of Malik's case, every transcript, every witness statement, and what he found shook him. Mistakes, contradictions, evidence mishandled, witnesses pressured. It was clear Malik's trial had never been about truth. It was about painting a young black boy as guilty before it even began. With time running out, Darius stepped forward as Malik's last hope. His colleagues warned him, "It's been 25 years. These cases never change." But Darius refused to listen. He wasn't just fighting for Malik. He was fighting for Clara, for the promise she made on the church steps, when she whispered to 3 abandoned children, You're not alone anymore. As the execution date drew near, the family gathered one last time. Clara, frail and tired, looked at Malik through the thick glass of the prison visitation room. His once youthful face had hardened. His eyes, weary from decades behind bars, yet when he saw her, he smiled faintly. "Ma," he whispered, "you don't have to keep fighting. I'm tired. I don't want you to suffer anymore." Clara pressed her hand to the glass. Her voice shook, but her words carried the strength of all the years she had carried him. "Malik Johnson, I did not find you so you could give up. I did not raise you so the world could take you away. I will fight for you until my last breath, and so will your brother." Malik's eyes filled with tears, the first he had allowed himself in years. For the first time in decades, he felt something greater than despair. The night of the execution arrived. The prison gates loomed heavy. The clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, protesters gathered. Candles flickered in their hands. Voices rose into the night, chanting Malik's name. Inside, Clara sat in a wheelchair, hands trembling, lips whispering prayer after prayer. And then, just as the final hour approached, a phone rang. The warden picked it up, his face unreadable. Silence hung in the air. Then, he gave the order, "Stand down." Malik's execution had been halted. Darius's last-minute appeal had gone through. He had shown enough evidence of injustice that the judge issued an emergency stay. Malik's life, once hanging by a thread, had been pulled back from the edge. The fight was far from over, but the tide had shifted. Months of hearings followed. Witnesses recanted. Evidence long ignored was finally brought to light. And slowly, painfully, the truth unraveled. Malik never deserved the sentence that had stolen 25 years of his life. And then came the day of the ruling. The courtroom was packed. Clara sat in the front row, her children beside her. Malik, shackled but standing tall, listened as the judge delivered the words he had prayed to hear for half his life. "Malik Johnson, your conviction is overturned. You are free." The room erupted. Aisha wept into her hands. Darius closed his eyes in relief. And Clara, too weak to stand, lifted her hands to the sky, whispering a thank you only she and God could hear. The reunion outside the courthouse was unlike anything they had imagined. Malik stepped into the sunlight, blinking as though he was seeing the world for the first time. Clara's arms opened, and he fell into them, a grown man, weeping like a child. The boy she had found on the church steps, the boy the world tried to erase, was finally free. Reporters crowded, cameras flashed, but in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was family. And what mattered most was Clara's choice, made 25 years earlier, to love 3 abandoned children when she had nothing to give, because that choice had come full circle. The child she saved, the quiet, bookish boy named Darius, had grown into the man who saved his brother's life. Clara lived to see her children together again. Though her body was frail, her spirit burned brighter than ever. She often sat on the porch with Malik, Darius, and Aisha, listening to their laughter, watching them build the life she had always prayed for. And sometimes, when the nights were quiet, she gathered them once more around the kitchen table, Hands held tight, prayers whispered into the air. A reminder that no matter how heavy life became, love would always be stronger. This is not just the story of Malik or Darius or even Clara. It is the story of what it means to believe when the world tells you not to. It is the story of how one act of courage can ripple through generations, turning abandoned children into survivors, and survivors into heroes. Clara's choice to love became the foundation for a miracle, and though she never asked for recognition, her legacy became clear the day her son stood in a courtroom and stopped an execution. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments which part touched you the most. Would you have had the strength Clara did? Could you have carried the weight she carried? And if stories like this remind you of the power of love, dignity, and justice, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe, because there are countless stories like Clara's. Stories that prove, even in the darkest places, light can break through.